In this walkthrough video, I'm going to show how to set up and run Kubernetes environment on the Windows machine. First of all, there are a couple of prerequisites. This tutorial assumes that you're running Windows 10 Home Edition or any non-enterprise edition with Docker Toolbox. If you're running a Docker desktop environment on Windows 10 Enterprise, the set of instructions will not work for your setup. There are two binary executables that we're going to need to download. One of them is kubectl, which is a command line utility for Kubernetes, and the binary for Minikube itself. So notice that the URL I'm using has a version number encoded in it. This version corresponds to the version of Kubernetes that you're going to be running locally. In my case, I'm using version 1.14, which is the latest version at the time. We're going to go ahead and get the executable file and save it locally. Once we have the file downloaded, I'm going to go ahead and move it somewhere on my C drive. Ultimately, it can be any location. You can create a subfolder for it, but I'm just gonna use a C drive location for simplicity. So here's my executable for the kubectl. Next, we're going to go ahead and grab the executable for the Minikube itself. So this is the official page for Minikube, and there are binaries available for Linux, Windows, and the installation instructions for Mac OS. I'm going to grab the one for Windows. Once we have the file downloaded, I'm going to rename it to just Minikube. And we're going to go ahead and move it over to the same location as the kubectl. So here it is, it's minikube.exe. An important part here is to go ahead and add the path where we have the files to our environment variables. So we're going to access our system properties, advanced system settings, and then in environmental variables for the path, we're going to make sure that the path to the file is added. So since I already have it, I'll delete it. But all you need to do is click new, and you can browse to the location of the executables. Now in my case, that was just the C drive. If you created a subfolder, make sure that you add the subfolder path to your environment correctly. All right, once we have that, we can now go ahead and first of all confirm that that is working. You can use Windows PowerShell, Windows command line, or any bash terminal that you have available on your machine. I'm going to use the Windows command line. I'm going to run it as administrator just to bypass any permission issues. So there are two ways we can run it. Assuming that we added the path to the environmental variable correctly, we can simply refer to our executables by their name. For the Minikube, we're going to just check the version. Alternatively, if we're not changing the environmental variable, we can always run this directly as the binary executable by doing .exe extension and run it in this fashion. In this case, we want to make sure that the command prompt is open in that very same directory where the executables are located. The next step would be to go ahead and start up our Minikube. Now there are multiple flags you can use for the start command, and you can check all the available options by doing the flag for help. So that gives us all available configuration options. We're just going to go ahead and use the defaults for the purposes of the demo. Now this could take a little while for the downloads to complete, so I'm going to pause the video. Alright, once this process is finished running, here's the output that we expect to see. Minikube had completed a number of tasks for us, so it did a lot of heavy lifting in terms of creating a virtual machine that is going to be running the master node and the worker node for Kubernetes. It pre-configured the internal network with the default port that it's using right here. And it went ahead and started the API server for the Kubernetes master node. Now that we have that available, one thing we can do is take a look at the Kubernetes dashboard. Now this dashboard is available through Kubernetes, not the Minikube itself, meaning you can start it with either the Minikube or the Kube CLI. To start it through Minikube, and it will open up in the browser. It's the Minikube dashboard command. And we can use a flag for URL to attach a permanent access point to it. So it takes just a few moments for this to fire up, and we can go ahead and copy this URL in the browser in order to open up the Kubernetes dashboard. Now everything that is available in the dashboard is also available through the kubectl, through the command line interface, but it just gives you a visual representation of what you currently have configured on your cluster. So right now we are running just one cluster. We don't have any pods configured as of yet, but we do have certain functionalities we can already use, like persistent volume setup. We can take a look at our namespaces, and what we have here is just the default kube system based configurations. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and set up a pod with a Tomcat container running on it using built-in Docker Toolbox. Everything that you see in the Kubernetes dashboard will also be available for you to check on in your command line interface. So by default, when we ran the Minikube start, it configured a one node cluster. The default node label is Minikube. However, you could use the flag -p for the start command to define a custom name. Now, if we do run a kube CLI interface to check on the nodes that we currently have, that's exactly what we will see. We will see a Minikube node that is ready to be started. Our next step here is to go ahead and start up Tomcat from just the default image available through Docker Hub. In order to do that, we're gonna jump back into the command line, and I have a second one open here so that it can be running kube CLI, and we're just going to go ahead and run this command that will grab a default Tomcat image and map it to port 8080. Okay, so that created a deployment for us under the name Tomcat. And we should be seeing that in our dashboard under the deployments category. Alright, so we created a pod for us. It's not quite ready to go as of yet. It takes a few minutes for the CLI command to pull the image. While the Tomcat image is being pulled here in the pods section, we can see that the status of this pod is waiting. The container is being created. Typically takes a couple of minutes, and then once the container is created, the status will update accordingly. So now we see that the status has been updated in the deployment section. We will see that one pod is active out of 1 pods that are currently available on this node. And then in the pods section, we can see that the status for this particular pod is running. Our next step here is to expose this deployment to the local host. And in order to do that, back in our command line for kubectl, we're going to run the kubectl expose deployment command for the Tomcat pod that we created. And once the service is exposed, we now should be seeing that reflecting in the services section of our dashboard. We can take a look at the specific configuration for the Tomcat that was started up by clicking on it here in the services, where we can see the details, endpoints, the pod that it belongs to, and the log of events. We can accomplish the same thing in the command line by running kubectl describe pod and then followed by the name of the pod. Now, this Tomcat deployment that we created can be easily scaled horizontally. Once again, there is a command line interface option to do that, or additionally you can do it through the dashboard. So here in the deployment section, you can scale the pod just by simply defining the number of replicas. Which will take some time to spin up, and once the process is completed, we should be seeing the replica sets available here. So that's just still in progress.